Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now to the front pages as usual, and they're really dominated today by the aftermath or fallout from the Conservative Party conference. There's the Sunday Telegraph: Tories at war as Theresa May plans for no EU deal. She's raising lots of money to spend in case there is no deal. The Observer has a version of the same sort of thing. Clear the cabinet of the old guard in order to rescue the party, the Prime Minister's told. A demand for the Prime Minister to do a pretty big reshuffle as part of her planning. The Sunday Times has the same story, a very, very big write-through we're going to be talking about there too. But we are in Scotland, and I want to turn to a few of the Scottish papers. There's the Sunday Herald. Nicola Sturgeon, it says, is going to announce plans at this conference so that EU citizens who want to stay in Scotland are going to be helped financially to do so after Brexit. But it's not all good news for her. There's the Sunday Mail. Nick's new poll shock, it says. That's another poll showing her personal ratings down to their lowest. The SNP are still by far the most popular party in Scotland, but according to a couple of polls, Labour have now overtaken the Conservatives in number 2 spot. Finally, there's the Sunday Mirror, just so I can make it clear. Exposed, cons partying on drugs, vodka and fast food. And we should make it clear that's not Conservatives they're talking about, that's prisoners. Much to talk about here. Aisha, I mentioned the Sunday Times story there, and they are again saying that the Prime Minister is going to have a reshuffle and may even move or remove Boris Johnson.
Yeah, there's a big old double-page spread in the Sunday Times. They have an interview with Theresa May where she basically says, look, my feelings are hurt, but I'm pretty resilient and I'm very much carrying on. I mean, look, she's had an absolutely disastrous week. To coin a phrase, I think no speech would have been better than a bad speech in terms of how badly her conference went. But it's not just that she's had bad luck. When your leadership is weak, bad luck becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the Conservatives find themselves in a very difficult position. They are in political purgatory at the moment because they know they can't really get rid of her now. There is no clear idea of who would be her successor.
And what the direction would be as well, because
Absolutely.
They're very divided about what kind of country will be after Brexit.
Exactly, and I was at the Tory Party conference last week, and at a lot of the fringe meetings, there was a lot of frustration from sort of younger MPs who want a bigger vision for the country, talking about stagnating living standards, wages, public services, you know, the Conservatives not connecting with young people. Yet the leadership of the party is very tinnier to that.
Yes.
Everyone's in this Brexistential crisis.
Brexistential, that's a good point.
And there's so much infighting, so it's very difficult. Although she's mounting a fight back this week, and she's saying that she's going to be around for a while.
And she has probably, David Torrance, stopped the immediate plot against her. That seems that the air seems to have gone out of that a bit. The Mail on Sunday has got some fascinating WhatsApp messages between Tory MPs.
It does. Implosion of the plotters is the banner headline there. Fascinating that these days so much political and probably government business seems to be conducted by WhatsApp, otherwise used for gossip from reality television and the like. But the focus of this is a sort of bus stop between Nadine Dorries, loyal to the Prime Minister, and the MP James Cleverly, perceived to be in the Boris Johnson.
Cleverly, we should say, furiously denies any involvement in any plot.
Yeah, although in the WhatsApp exchange with Dorries, he doesn't actually respond properly. So she says, you know, were you one of the supposed plotters? Were you on that list?
And he goes quiet.
There's a 3-minute delay, and she says, you read my message 3 minutes ago. How long does it take you to type not true? To which he responds, let's not do witch hunt stuff on here. But it shows you how much tension there is still there. As you say, the first phase of that rather inept coup attempt from Grant Shapps, or Grant Schnaps, as Catherine Marr calls him, has sort of died down, but there's still obviously a load of tension from the fallout from that.
So looking forward for the Prime Minister, there's, as we were saying, lots of suggestions that she should reshape the cabinet, but also that she needs a much stronger domestic agenda to try and wrestle the momentum back from the opposition parties. And John Major has a very, very interesting piece, I think, in the Mail on Sunday on that subject.
Yes, he does. I mean, it's headlined, End the Self-Absorbed Plotting, or Marxist will soon be in number 10. I mean, you could have a long thought about whether it is Marxist to simply bring things into public ownership, which are in public ownership across much of Europe. But he has a long diatribe about Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. But very interestingly, he says that he talks about universal credit. We know there's been a meltdown on this, even though the government won't admit it. But John Major is saying it's theoretically impeccable, but operationally messy, socially unfair and unforgiving. And he calls on the Conservative Party to show its heart again. I have to say, you were there, I was only watching the speech, and OK, a lot of coughing interrupted, punctuated some of the policy announcements. But when one of the big taras, the $2 billion extra for social housing, came out, there was not a squeak on the conference floor. No applause, no recognition.
The trouble is, they weren't really listening, were they?
They may not have been. They got the cue for some of the other announcements. Yeah. But I didn't get the feeling throughout that entire speech that the sort of bleeding heart conservatism that she was starting to move into was actually resonant with the people that were sitting there. So if you're trying to turn the corner, and also Major saying, let's not have Brexit, 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 let's have people, 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 and he's talking about the support ageing in the party. You know, he's really opening up, I think, all the wounds of the Tory party now, and it seems to me it's pretty difficult to see a short-term fix. But
we have got Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. No way around it. There's that story about Theresa May now putting quite a lot of money aside for a no-deal scenario, David Torrance. But there's a very interesting piece in The Observer about a potential legal way of not leaving the EU at all.
Yeah, this comes from a QC called Jessica Seymour in Matrix Chambers. She says she has it on good authority from two sources that there's legal advice, secret legal advice, obviously legal advice always seems to be secret, that the Article 50 notification can be withdrawn from by the UK government any time before March 2019, which of course is when we're supposed to leave. The government line, of course, is that it's irreversible. It now has this legal and political momentum and it can't be changed. So she's asked for that to be released under FOI, and Nick Clegg's taken up the baton, tying in conveniently with a new book, How to Stop Brexit and Make Britain Great Again. But intriguingly, in a comment piece in The Observer by the former Deputy Prime Minister, he's basically urging people not to join the Liberal Democrats, his old party, but the Tories or Labour.
Bizarre position to be in. Join any party except for mine.
His idea being that you can somehow exert pressure from within and force a change of course.
Aisha, we should really talk a bit about the SNP. We've been talking an awful lot about Theresa May, but this is Nicola Sturgeon Day, and there's a piece by Andrew Collier, who used to work with her.
Yes, Andrew Collier was Nicola Sturgeon's former speechwriter, and he makes the argument that this conference is going to be quite difficult for the SNP because independence is something that, weirdly, they actually want to try and avoid. The public attitude and appetite for independence seems to have quelled, particularly after the last election. So the party faces quite an interesting balance at the moment. There's almost two wings of the party. There's a wing of the party that says, look, we've got to be a party of government. We've got to stop banging on about independence. There's big issues with the health service, education, public services. But of course, in a way, the raison d'etre of the SNP is nationalism and independence. So how do you satisfy both of these?
Yes.
And apparently, I think no motions have been selected on independence, but he says she can run, but she can't hide because independence will rage in the bars, in the fringe meetings and in the corners.
It's a bit like the Labour Party not discussing Brexit on the floor of their conference in Brighton. Leslie Riddoch, there's a very interesting story about one of the things that Nicola Sturgeon is going to do, we read, which is to help EU citizens. Just explain to us, because I'm not absolutely clear in my mind what's going to happen.
Well, yes, it's the front page of the Sunday Herald, and then inside, Sturgeon vows Scotland will pay to let citizens of EU stay after Brexit. What that seems to be is the expectation that if finally Theresa May makes good on her guarantee that EU citizens can stay here, they may be made to pay to have a pass card to register, and the Scottish Government will cough up about 75 quid to give people settled status. So that's public sector employees that are EU nationals will get that. They'll exhort the private sector to do the same. I mean, it's a token thing, but it's still significant because it's trying to put a bit of clear water between the attitudes towards the EU and its nationals north and south of the border.
It must be quite frustrating for Nicola Sturgeon because she's been more or less pushed out of any real negotiations with the EU over Brexit, despite all the promises that she was going to be included. So she's an observer a lot of the time, and there are very rare occasions when she's got enough powers to do anything. And this is one of the examples, I guess.
It's true. It follows a pattern. If you're living in Scotland, you'll have noticed that the bedroom tax, for example, was mitigated 3 years ago, so north of the border it doesn't effectively exist. And there's quite a number of unpopular measures which have been bought out by the Scottish Government. So this is just adding to the pile.
David, there's a lot of polling in today's papers, of course. Can you just give us the sort of overall headlines about what we learn?
Yeah, generally speaking, the SNP remains the most popular party. Projections for the 2021 Holyrood election has them losing, as the Sunday Times says, their overall majority, although, of course, they lost their overall majority last year. That's not new. But underneath that sort of main headline, it's still quite interesting that Nicola Sturgeon's still popular, has been for the past few years, but it's down. And Ruth Davidson, the Scottish Conservative leader, in the papers a lot over the past week, has overtaken her in that respect.
What's going on? Because she's becoming more and more popular, but her party is not. They've lost a little bit of ground to the Labour Party in Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, the Scottish Tories only just squeaked second place in the Holyrood elections last year, so that's always been a bit fragile. But this poll suggests that the Scottish Labour Party, currently in the midst of another leadership election, could end up back in second place in a few years' time.
One of the problems of taking the programme to Glasgow is it's too hot and sunny. It feels
it's a common problem in Glasgow.
It feels a little bit like Catalonia.
We need our factor 50 on, actually. It's like... So we've all seen the huge pictures of the demonstrations, not just in Catalonia now, but also in Madrid as well. And there's a piece in The Observer saying that although the referendum was obviously very high, in terms of 90% of those who came out to vote wanted to leave, there is a lot of voice being given now to people who want a settled solution. And there are sort of demonstrations taking place. There's a new movement called Let's Talk. They want the government to have some mediation from an outside international body which they can trust in good faith. But the situation is so tense right now, and actually there's a great quote at the end which says, look, the issue here is often, and there's echoes of this for Scotland, I guess, and anywhere, referendums are often the problem, not the solution, and referendums can be very socially divisive, which of course we know from here in Scotland, and of course with the EU referendum. And I think what people in Spain want is some kind of settled solution. There's a real anxiety about where this is going to lead to.
It was really, really interesting. After we saw those hideous pictures of the Spanish police beating up women trying to exercise their vote, and dragging people by the hair out of them and destroying ballot boxes, there was almost no really pungent criticism from Britain, from any of the parties, because
or the European Union.
Yes.
In different ways, everybody needs Spain. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it's true, although, I mean, the SNP did come out and condemn that pretty quickly. And actually, the Scottish parties, I think Ruth Davidson also had comments on that. There's a wee consensus there.
Very briefly, before we end, Leslie, you must show us the most beautiful pictures of the day are in The Observer, and this is a plan to save Scottish islands, and some gorgeous pictures of Scottish islands.
It's a pull-out, actually, saving Scotland's islands, and it is so beautiful. It has one that has a particular resonance for me. That's the island of Egg, looking across to the mountains of the Cuillin of Rum.
Coups on the beach.
Coups on the beach.
What are we saving them from?
Well, it's all the problems, losing population, and these things they sound kind of fluffy and inevitable. They're not. Egg bought itself out 20 years ago. I was a trustee of that buyout, and the population has really turned around, mostly because they can offer free land to young people to build a two-bedroomed house for 40,000 quid. Now, that's attractive.
Well worth a read. We're out of time, folks, but thanks very much indeed for that. Really, really interesting.
Let's dive into the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Sunday Times, already discussed. It says that Theresa May is planning to reshuffle her cabinet later this month. It also says at least 3 cabinet ministers discussed the need to replace her just this week. Senior figures in the Conservative Party are urging the Prime Minister to promote a new generation of Tory MPs to freshen up her government. That's the take in The Observer. The Sunday Express says that Mrs May has the backing of the 3 Brexiteers, Boris Johnson, David Davis and, of course, Liam Fox, despite something of a difficult week. One of the PM's predecessors, Sir John Major, has given his backing to her. He's written in the Mail on Sunday. He says that Tory MPs need to get in line or they risk a Labour government. The Sunday Telegraph says the government is setting aside billions of pounds to prepare the country for the event of a no-Brexit deal being reached with the EU. The HuffPost UK says the SNP want to prove they are still radical after a disappointing election result in June. Of course, their party conference beginning in Glasgow today. And BuzzFeed is leading on a story about what it's like to be a young Conservative at university. Well, to talk about all of that, we're joined by an illustrious panel. The boss of Pimlico Plumbers and Tory donor, Charlie Mullins, co-editor of Conservative Women, I should say, Laura Perrins, and BuzzFeed's political editor, Jim Paterson. Lovely to see you all. Shall we start with possibly the most explosive story of the day? The Sunday Times has been getting some decent detail on the inner machinations of the Conservative Party. This time, though, they've spoken to Theresa May and she's planning a reshuffle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's long overdue. I think she's been put up with enough from her cabinet ministers. They're intimidating her. They're actually belittling her. They're not drinking from the same teapot. And I think it's now important that she does something about it.
I mean, Laura, there are reshuffles and there are reshuffles, aren't there? I mean, there is one name that needs to move if she's in any way to be seen to reassert her authority, and that's Boris Johnson, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what you want to have a reshuffle for. Is it in order to stamp her authority, or is it genuinely to shake up the party and bring in some new blood?
So which is it?
Well, I think it should be shaking up the party and bringing in new blood, but I sense it's an attempt to stamp her authority on things. I think she's going to really struggle to do that. I mean, she has got to be the least authoritative leader now coming out of a party conference since Ian Duncan Smith, and he was gone within 3 weeks.
I mean, is this, to an extent, if we are to believe the story and there is going to be a reshuffle, is this our put up or shut up moment? You know, move Boris somewhere else in the cabinet and see whether or not he'll accept it?
Well, it's also interesting. We've basically just had briefing back and forth between Boris and Number 10 now for about 2 or 3 weeks now, where Boris seems to do everything he can to get sacked, and Theresa May's team never quite get around to it. But the main issue is that we don't know when Theresa May might step down as Prime Minister, may leave the post, but we're almost certain that she won't fight another election. So whether or not we've liked it, at some level in the next 4.5 years, there will be a leadership contest based on when you talk to Tory MPs. So it's just a matter of when. Does it happen now? Does it happen in 2 years? Or does it happen on the eve of an election? I mean,
at the same time, I mean, the Sky data poll that we've conducted is pretty revealing. Actually, you know, a sizable chunk of the population, 42%, think that an immediate resignation would actually damage the Brexit process. I mean, her longevity is, in a sense, tied pretty much to the way in which we get out of the European Union.
Well, that's right, but let's not kid anyone. Undoubtedly, she's going to step down at some stage, and hopefully she's given enough time to do the job that we've got her in there. But in the same token, we don't want any more disruption. You know, we need her to have a smooth exit and get someone else lined up who can be in a strong position and make sure that the Conservatives carry on.
Yeah, and still, despite that disastrous week, you know, Boris still polls best when it comes to the next Conservative leader.
Yes, I know. I'm always baffled by the attraction of Boris. I find it absolutely incredible.
Was it just name recognition?
It's probably name recognition, but I think Charlie's right in the vast majority of people will want stability and will want the Conservatives to carry on and try and make a good fist of Brexit negotiations. But she is incredibly weak. I think she's brought much of this upon herself. She can't go into the next election, so the only question is when. But it introduces massive instability.
Lauren, I don't think she's brought it on herself. I mean, she's got people in her corner that are supposed to be on the same side. They clearly want her to come unstuck. They're clearly letting her get beaten up all the time, and they clearly want her job.
And so we've got plenty of evidence of that. I mean, Jim, your piece on the use of social media. I mean, you know, for all that we keep hearing from the Home Secretary that end-to-end encryption is, you know, really fundamental.
Yeah.
Okay. How does this stuff get out there? Take us through.
So we just did a piece looking at how during the party conference, Conservatives are using social media. It's one of those sort of truisms in the party at the moment that Labour completely outgunned them online, that they're not getting any traction among online news sources, that people just aren't engaging with them on Facebook. So we looked at their Instagram account and. Well, it's not great. They were going around, you know, Labour have pictures of cats posing with Jeremy Corbyn, and the Conservatives have washed out pictures of the Defence Secretary
it's
without any caption.
It's a remarkably... I mean, he is the Defence Secretary. You know, there should probably be some people out there around the world who are frightened of them, but probably not little children just going onto social media. You see a picture of him staring blankly into the camera.
The phrase that was used by one Cameron-era aide when I talked to him about it was, it's an analogue party in a digital age. They're still putting out messages that work great on the front page of the Sunday Express, but don't really work particularly well online. And there's a lot of jostling among the people who want to take over from Theresa May to get a message that would work for that crowd, for a younger crowd, for people who read sites like BuzzFeed.
Interestingly, the one person in the Conservative Party who knows what he's doing when it comes to social media is, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who Instagram account, I think, has more followers than the official Labour Party account. And not a lot of people think he's very modern. I think he could be potentially a great leader, both in terms of what he actually believes in, but he also seems to get how social media works. It's an extraordinary situation the Conservatives have got themselves into. They've let things slide so badly.
But going back to the Boris guy, do you not think that the man needs to be moved out of the cabinet? He needs to be put in place. His duties need to be brought down a peg or two, and to stop him being disruptive and damaging to the party.
I seem to remember you repeatedly meeting up with Boris Johnson.
Photo
shoots, Charlie.
Well, Boris is a great guy, but in the same token, he's belittling the Prime Minister, he's intimidating her, he's bullying her, and why should a bully be allowed to win?
Charlie, I mean, a simple question. I mean, you've donated plenty of money to the Conservative Party. Should Theresa May go now?
Not at the moment. We need to organise her exit. We need to, but why should the bullies
as
win?
soon as possible?
Well, let's just say it needs to be organised so there's not so much disruption. But the point everyone's missing here is the man that's causing all the problems is Boris. He needs to be taken down a peg or two. If he was working on my company, he would be cleaning vans at the moment.
Yeah, but Boris isn't working in your company. He's the Foreign Secretary.
Yeah.
I'm no big fan of Boris, but I mean, ultimately, she has weakened her own position. She has
but they've destroyed her.
Theresa May did not have to call that snap election. She chose to call the snap election.
That's her advisor, Laura. That's her advisor.
Ultimately, you have to take responsibility. If I make a bad decision, I don't go around blaming everybody else.
She's got all these people around.
You take responsibility.
Look at the security mess up at the party conference with that busybody coming up with a P45, right? Yeah. Security people are wrong, out of order. Her advisors are out of order with the election, and they're still out of...
We're running out of time, but just very simply put, what would it say about Theresa May's leadership if, there is a reshuffle and Boris Johnson stays exactly where he is?
She's lost it. If there's a reshuffle and he stays where it is, they've clearly decided he could do way more damage outside the tent than inside it.
Jim, Laura, Charlie, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you so much for coming in.
So after that speech, and with the Westminster air thick with rumours of plots against the Prime Minister, the headline writers have had a busy weekend. The PM has given an interview to the Sunday Times in which she admits that my feelings can be hurt, but I'm pretty resilient. The paper also reports that she is planning a ministerial reshuffle after the European Council summit later this month. The former Prime Minister John Major has leapt to her defence in today's Sunday Mail, saying the country has had enough of the self-absorbed and disloyal behaviour we've witnessed for weeks. It's been interpreted by some as a dig at the Foreign Secretary. But Boris Johnson has come out in support of the Prime Minister. In a WhatsApp message to fellow MPs, which somehow found its way into the newspapers, Mr Johnson said that people are fed up with this malarkey, and he urged his colleagues to get behind the PM. With Brexit negotiations resuming in Brussels again tomorrow, the Prime Minister will attempt to regain the initiative at home as she updates Parliament following her Florence speech and then faces Jeremy Corbyn at PMQs on Wednesday for the first time in a month. Speaking on the Andrew Marr show earlier this morning, the Conservative leader in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, said a cabinet reshuffle was well within the Prime Minister's power and that Theresa May was the best person to lead the country forward.
The Prime Minister, absolutely. The makeup of her cabinet is entirely within her purview, and people serve within cabinet at the pleasure of the Prime Minister, whoever it is. Now, you've seen some quite unfortunate shenanigans this week in terms of a couple of people trying to push, but the pushback has been pretty strong. We're behind the Prime Minister. She's the best person to lead us forward.
So we'll catch up with all the big stories with our gaggle of Westminster experts. Is the Prime Minister now safe, Steve? Do you think, have the plots against her fizzled out?
Safe is not the word that springs to mind in this context.
Safe for now?
Well, safe for today, but I mean, there is a wider context here, I think, which is that she came to power via Brexit. Cameron was the third Tory Prime Minister to fall over Europe. And I suspect, although who knows, that the trigger for her demise will be something to do with Brexit. When she fails to please enough MPs and it triggers a downfall, it might come through some other way. And then someone else will take over in an equally turbulent context, which I suspect won't change with a change of leadership. But no, she's not safe at all.
Isabel, what's your take? I mean, it was astonishing pace of events this week. The speech on Wednesday. Thursday, there was a huge plot against it. By Saturday, it seemed to have been quelled. What?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think there is some terrible treachery afoot. And the great irony is that this terrible treachery is not coming from the likes of Grant Shapps and Boris Johnson, both of whom at least have been bold enough to put out into the open what their feelings are about the Prime Minister's leadership and her approach to Brexit. The greatest treachery is coming from all the cabinet, who are frankly absolutely on manoeuvres, plotting and phoning each other. They've all got their own agendas. And I think at absolute best, what we're approaching now is a state of sort of suboptimal equilibrium at best. And bear in mind that there's the budget coming up. Yeah. A mistake in that budget could prove fatal very, very quickly for the Prime Minister.
She's just one problem, one crisis away from being toppled in.
Yeah, I mean, it's all really a function of us going through this bizarre constitutional experiment, which is the country trying to do the biggest thing it's done outside of war for 70 years without a proper functioning Prime Minister. She is safe for now on the same basis that she was safe straight after the election, in that if there was someone obviously available, a Michael Heseltine-style figure, she would have gone in the hours after the election, and that's true after the shambles of the conference this week. But they looked around and there isn't someone who could automatically step in. I think there's a possibility that Amber Rudd or David Davis, if Theresa May encounters another disaster around the budget or something in the next few weeks and months. But the Tory party knows that this is not the person that's going to be leading them into the next general election, and it would be surprising if Theresa May is even the leader of the Tories at the next conference.
And even if talk of the leadership is set aside for now, the party still looks deeply disunited. We've got John Major in the Mail on Sunday today taking a swipe at the Foreign Secretary, describing them as indulgent, and we still see briefings against cabinet ministers all of the time. For how long can we continue, as Ian says, these hugely important negotiations with a cabinet who are not together?
Well, it's an impossible situation, and John Major knows what it's like. He had it with the Maastricht Treaty. You remember when he referred to bastards in his cabinet? And so he knows what it's like, and he was tormented and went through hell and then was slaughtered at a general election, having fought a wacky leadership contest as Prime Minister. And we're in that kind of terrain, but as Ian suggests, with Brexit, an even more mountainous obstacle. And the reason why this is so challenging for them, and indeed the country, is that if they do change leader, which they will do at some point, that leader will still be in a hung parliament, still with a divided parliamentary party, negotiating with the European Union, which has a much clearer idea of what its ends are in relation to Brexit.
Okay, so let me just bring Isabel in there quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things here. I think it's still 50-50 that she'll be with us as Prime Minister by Christmas. I think many of the party are under the illusion that a leadership election would have to be a long, drawn-out affair. In fact, if you look at the rules, that can be done relatively quickly. It's very much up to the discretion of the 1922 committee and other officials. And then I'm sure we'll be talking later about the reshuffle and how that might strengthen or weaken her. I'm hearing this morning that if she tries to move Boris out of the Foreign Office, he will resist that.